Over the years, I've owned many waterproof jackets. My current wardrobe consists of a military issue waterproof jacket that I use when I'm out in the woods bushcrafting, a very lightweight, very low bulk waterproof jacket that I use in the summer months and when I'm wanting to carry very little kit and move at speed. And I also have a much heavier weight waterproof jacket that I use for those prolonged torrential downpours and also operating in winter conditions as well. But all of those waterproof jackets have one thing in common, and it's that they're all made out of Gore-Tex material. That was until I've just made my latest addition to my wardrobe, which is this. My new Keela Stratus waterproof jacket. If you're interested to find out why I've decided to make a move away from wearing Goretex and I'm experimenting with this jacket, keep on watching. Those of you that have seen previous kit reviews from me know that I'm not one to go into the minutiae of every single feature and try and list them all out. The manufacturer's website is a far better place for that. So in the link below this in the description on YouTube, there'll be a link out to the manufacturer's page for this so you can look in the intimate detail that some of you want and need about this jacket. That's not the purpose of this video. The purpose of this video is to give my perspective and share my experience of wearing this jacket over the past 3 or 4 months. Some of the positives I found with it, some of the things that have kind of had me scratching my head a little bit. So from the outset then, as I've already mentioned, this is not a Gore-Tex jacket. One of the downsides of Gore-Tex or any material that purports to be breathable is that it's breathable under very specific conditions. If the air humidity, if the dampness and wetness in the air is at a certain point, that inhibits the breathability of that material. If the air temperature is below a certain point, that inhibits the breathability of the material. That Gore-Tex and other breathable materials are breathable under certain conditions. It may be the case that you find yourself, and I certainly do find myself on occasions, in conditions where that breathability is inhibited. And that's where Keela's proprietary System Dual Protection, or SDP product, which is what's the technology behind this. This is how it works slightly differently. With Gore-Tex, you have a barrier, you have a material shown by my hand here, and that stops rain coming in and it allows moisture and vapor, your sweat, your condensation to breathe out. It's a single layer, stops anything coming in, allows certain things out. But as we've said, that's inhibited in certain conditions. With this type of product that I'm wearing today, there's actually 2 layers, and you'll notice that my hands aren't flush against one another. There's a slight gap between them. One of those layers, the external layer, the layer that you can see now, the red material, that stops the rain getting in. It is 100% waterproof. It stops the rain getting in. This material here, the way I'm moving my hand now, the inner layer, that is breathable. That allows moisture to get out. You'll notice that in between there is a gap with my hands. There is an air gap. And what that air gap does is it grabs the moisture and runs it off out the bottom of the jacket. So we can see here that we can have a 100% waterproof layer, and those have existed for many years. We can have a 100% waterproof layer, sorry, breathable layer, but because that breathable layer and the waterproof layer aren't the same, it is not inhibited to the same degree as Gore-Tex and other all-in-one type breathable materials are, because they're not operating as part of the same fabric or the same layer. There is that separation and that air gap that allows that diffusion of the evaporation of the sweat and the body heat and the moisture that you're generating out of the jacket, albeit via a slightly different route. That air gap also means that you've got a degree of insulation in this jacket. And I have to say this, when I put this jacket on in the house, as soon as I got it in front of the mirror to pose and to look at it, it felt warm. And in my head I thought, well, that's because you're trying a jacket on in the house, Craig, you're gonna feel warm. But even out on the hill, I'm stood here now and you can probably tell it's quite a sunny day. There's a bit of a breeze, it's a cold breeze, but it's not a bad day. I feel very warm in this jacket. All I've got underneath it is a Keela merino wool top. So I've got a warm base layer on, but I feel warm in this jacket. And that's a consideration. This is a jacket in which you are going to stay dry, but you're also going to get warm. So you need to kind of balance that with the conditions that you're going to use this in. This is not a thick jacket. If you were to pick this up, you would just think it's a mid-weight, typical Gore-Tex type jacket by the weight of it and as you rub your fingers between themselves, it doesn't feel thick. There's no down in this. There's no synthetic insulation. There's nothing like that in here. But this is a warm jacket because it's trapping that layer of air, not just against the breathable inner material, but between the breathable and also the waterproof layer. That gap between my hands there, it's trapping a layer of air there. So this is a warm jacket, but it is not an insulated type jacket as you would typically consider to be a mid layer. So the pros and cons of this over Gore-Tex is I can't find any cons, and I'll come on to that in terms of my experience of wearing this jacket. I can't find any areas where this is a downside over wearing Gore-Tex. The potential downside, and I'm clutching at straws here, is that this is a warm jacket. I feel warm in this jacket already. Is that a bad thing? It could be, but equally it may mean you don't need to carry such a heavy mid-weight layer. You could just wear this on top of a base layer. In terms of the pros, this comes in significantly cheaper than a similar jacket with the same specs and features. Gore-Tex wise, you could easily be paying double the money for a Gore-Tex jacket than what this costs. I'm not going to say the cost of this because it will vary depending on when you're looking at this video. Go over to the link that I posted below. You can check it out on Keela's website. But if you look at the specs of this, if you weigh the specs of this against a standard Gore-Tex jacket of the same specs, I can guarantee you're going to see a difference in the price between the two, and not a couple of pounds, I might suggest. So pros, same spec jacket for much less cost. Cons, you could feel warmer in this than just a standard Gore-Tex type jacket, but I'm not entirely sure that is solely a con. It could also be a pro as well. Over the past 3 or 4 months, I've worn this jacket at every possible opportunity, and some borderline opportunities, if I'm honest, outdoors when I'm out and about doing my thing. I've used it for walking the dog, I've used it for shopping, I've used it for walking down the high street, I've used it for family day outs, I've used it for low-level walks. However, a week ago today, I was a couple of miles behind me going up a mountain called Moel Shabad here in Snowdonia. It was absolutely gopping weather. It rained all day, and it wasn't just rain that was falling, it was wind that was being blown in. There was some high winds, so it wasn't just the jacket didn't just have to deal with the moisture, it had to deal with the pressure of that moisture coming in sideways and being blown in, as opposed to just a gentle drizzle down. The rain didn't let up from before I got out my car to long after I'd got out my car. It was a long wet day. I was wearing this jacket and the same base layer that I'm wearing today. I was wearing the same trousers. I did have Gore-Tex trousers over them, and I was wearing my full-on rigid winter type boots because it was just bogging and sopping wet. So base layer wise on top, exactly the same setup as I'm wearing today. I was out in total for probably between 4 and 4.5 hours, with a few stops along the way with Willow, my dog. So 4 to 4.5 hours I was out during the day, constant rain. I got back, I stopped off at Moel Shabad Cafe, which is a cafe at the bottom, and I stripped off. I wasn't bone dry underneath, which I will come on to. The jacket had not let any water in at any point, not through the hood or the shoulders, not through the face of the fabric, not through the zips or the pockets or the cuffs or those usual places like that. The jacket had not let any water in. Was I bone dry? No, I wasn't bone dry. Jackets, regardless of what they're made of, are not magic. They don't stop you sweating, okay? They just handle and manage that sweat and the evaporation of that sweat and perspiration. So I wasn't bone dry in my base layer. But let me be really clear about this. I was no damper on my base layer than if I'd walked up and down Moel Shabad in those conditions in a Gore-Tex jacket. I was no damper on my base layer than if I'd walked up and down there on a dry, temperate day like today. Not a hot day, I clearly sweat a lot on a hot day, but just a relatively cool, breezy, dry day. I was no damper on my base layer than that. So what that tells me is This jacket did not fail me in terms of allowing water in, and it did not fail me in terms of being able to transport that moisture out, which was the real test of this, because I've only ever worn breathable jackets. This was the first jacket that's got that dual protection layer where it transports the moisture, the evaporation of that perspiration in a slightly different way. This was a test bed for me, and I got back to that cafe and I was really chuffed. The jacket on that day stood up to what was thrown at it, and it was a pretty gopping day. It's the worst weather I've been out in since owning this jacket, and I go out in some pretty terrible conditions, so the jacket stood up to its promise on that day. It was no better or worse than some of the high-end Gore-Tex jackets that I've owned. Some horrible Gore-Tex jackets, but it was no better or worse than some of the best Gore-Tex jacket that I've owned. But going back to that pro point earlier on, it comes in at a significantly less price point than those higher end Gore-Tex jackets. So a huge tick in the box in terms of my experience so far wearing this jacket. I haven't worn it yet in cold, wet conditions. I live in North Wales. I'm sure those conditions aren't far away, although it's a gorgeous day today, and as I've said, we're in the middle of November and it's beautiful weather, so I'm sure those conditions, I hope those conditions are just around the corner. So I'll report back as and when I've got some experience of wearing this in cold, wet conditions as opposed to warm, wet conditions. Moving on to some of the specifications of this jacket. As I said earlier in the video, I will list below, I'll put a link below that lists out all the specifications over on the manufacturer's website, over on Keela's website. I'm not going to try and replicate it here, but generally speaking, it's got a great hood, helmet compatible hood, adjustable at multi-points with a nice framed wired hood there, and that was up most of last Saturday. That hood was up and performed admirably. The material itself is clearly a huge feature because it's quite innovative in terms of what it does. It's got the usual wrist adjustments, waist adjustments. It's got 7 pockets on this, which are hard to see when you first look at it, and that's kind of bringing me on to sort of some of these points where I've thought to myself, there's a potential development area there for this jacket. So going back to the hood has got multiple adjustment points, as I've just mentioned. They were adjustable with wet, not cold hands, but just wet hands. They were kind of adjustable when I was reaching around to adjust at the back of the hood. I think it would be a push. It would be far less easy to adjust them in winter with gloved hands or with cold hands. They were just about adjustable using wet but warm hands. I think that'll be a different thing when you're layered up. In terms of the pockets, it's got 7 pockets on it. It's got 2 pockets down at the hips where you'd expect them. It's got 2 external chest pockets, 2 internal chest pockets, which takes me to 6, and it's also got a pocket on the forearm. And it's those pockets where it's kind of had me scratching my head a little bit. Firstly, the hip pockets, that they're on the hips where you'd expect them to be. I can get my hands in comfortably, but I suspect if I had big, thick woolen or big, thick winter mitts or gloves or gauntlets on, that would be a bit of a push. I won't say they're small pockets. You know, it's not a struggle to put my hand in, and with thin summer base layer gloves, no problem at all. But with bigger gloves, I can see it being a problem getting my hands in there. When I got home, I compared these to some of my higher end Gore-Tex jackets that I've got, winter jackets, much bigger hip pockets on those than on this. So just something to be aware of. If you carry big, heavy gloves in the winter, it might be worth just having a think about how you're going to get these into the pocket. In terms of these outer pockets, they've got security attachments. One's a fixed security attachment in there, which is a great move. For those of you that have not seen my previous video on my Keela, can't remember what the model is, but my soft shell jacket, I did have a little whinge in there about putting external gear security loops on those pockets. They're already fitted in here. This one's quite a neat idea here, insofar that slightly different, and it is a quick release. So if you were carrying something that you needed to be sort of handed over to other people but still kept secure whilst it was on you, maybe a GPS unit, something like that, then you've got a quick release attachment there. There's another jacket, two more pockets inside, a huge internal dump pocket there, easily big enough to get a decent folded up Ortlieb case with a map inside. But over on this side, I think they call this a media pocket. I think this is the media pocket. When I first put my hand in here, I thought, oh, that'll be for my phone. But my phone doesn't fit in it. It feels like it would be big enough for a phone, but a small phone. So if you carry a small phone out on the hill, it'll fit in there. Mine isn't a big smartphone. It's not one of these crazy big smartphones that you get. It's an average size smartphone, but it doesn't fit in that pocket there. So I'm not sure what media they're thinking about putting in there. It feels too small for anything else. Maybe car keys could go in there, but I always prefer to put them in my rucksack. I don't like the thought of them rubbing against the material of a jacket, because they can be quite sharp, can't they, car keys? So I'm not entirely sure what that is for. But yeah, it just feels too small for a average size modern smartphone. And that brings me on to the wrist pocket here, which is on the left forearm. Again, I would say this is too small for a smartphone, and even if it wasn't, would I want my fairly heavy smartphone flapping about on my wrist whilst I'm walking? I suspect not. It's big enough for keys, but again, I wouldn't put them in there. Loose change would definitely fit, but who wants loose change jangling round on their forearm? So I'm not entirely sure what this could be for. You could definitely get a compass in there. A fairly small compass would fit in there. But for me, it wouldn't feel like the natural place to have a compass, because if a compass is in my pocket, I want it attached to me. If it's attached to me, the last place I want it attached to me is my arm, because as my arm moves around, I'd be dragging the compass. I'd want the compass attached to my chest pocket, where I'm static when I'm taking bearings and moving the compass. So I'm not being dragged around because it's attached to my forearm. GPS unit, I wouldn't want a GPS unit in there, because they can be quite heavy, and I wouldn't want that sort of sitting heavy on my forearm there. Paperwork could go in there. If you had a route card, or if you were leading a group of people and you perhaps had a emergency contact card in there with people's allergies or so on and so forth, that might be an ideal place. If you carry, as I sometimes do on certain things, a small piece of white transparent plastic and a chinograph for writing things on very, very quickly, that I don't need the detail, it's not a notebook, I just need to write things down quickly. Lightweight, small, that would fit in there. But the occasions I think that I would use this pocket are fairly slim. What it does provide, though, is a nice opportunity to have some of that 3M or that reflective material on there to increase visibility at night, which also brings me on to the fact that this has got lots of areas around it where there's that high visibility piping to allow you to sort of pop at night if anybody is looking for you. Fingers crossed that's not the case. So, brief overview of the features there. For me, the biggest plus of this, the biggest feature of this, is the construction of the jacket itself. It's that system dual protection. That for me is the biggest thing. Pockets are pockets. Attachment points are attachment points. They're all important. They're all a factor. But unless your pocket leaks, so pockets are pockets, zips are zips, hoods are hoods. It's the construction, it's the material of the jacket. Does it keep me dry from the elements? Does it do its best to manage my perspiration and the vapour that produces? The answer to both of those questions for this jacket, based on about 4 months of usage, sometimes in gopping weather, is a great big fat green tick in the box for those areas. If you haven't been able to tell already, I am very, very impressed with this jacket based upon the 3 or 4 months usage that it's had so far. I think I still want to wait for this jacket to have been used across a typical cold, hopefully cold UK winter this coming any day now, hopefully. So I think I still need to hold judgment for that. But this being used in typical temperate, wet, windy, horrible, typical North Wales conditions, it has knocked it out of the park. I do want to get that hopefully very cold winter under its belt though, and of course when I do that I'll feed back to you. If you're in the market for a new waterproof, breathable, or shall we say new waterproof, able to manage the moisture that you naturally produce jacket for this coming winter season, I think you could do a great deal worse than taking a look at this jacket. In my opinion, you get the same you get the same outputs from this that you would from a typical Gore-Tex jacket. You don't necessarily have the same hole in your pocket after you've done that. And of course, for many people, myself included, cost is always a factor. But in the current climate that we're in, cost is probably an even bigger factor. So if you can afford it, if you can afford to be looking for a new jacket for this winter, it is worth taking some time out of your day to put this on your list of things to research. I don't think you could go far wrong for the price point, the features and the performance that it has given me so far. I wouldn't recommend it if it wasn't up to scratch for me. It's up to scratch for me. It's slightly beyond up to scratch in some areas. So yeah, my tip for you is if you're looking for this type of jacket, you could do worse than taking a look at the Keela Stratus jacket. Whilst you're on this video, if you're interested in looking at my previous video in which I reviewed a Keela soft shell jacket, then that's appearing up on the screen now. Go and check that out, and you'll see some of the similar considerations that I've taken into account between the two. Cheers, folks.